Breaker Breaker 19 villains, you got your ears on. I'm your host, Tony. Welcome to the Channel 19 Experience Trucker Podcast. I'm back. It's Sunday, June 8th, episode number 16. I was away up in Minnesota, and with a little break in the podcast, I've been away from this desk. And it's a little weird getting back behind the microphone. It's kind of like getting in your personal car after you've been on the road for a bunch of weeks. There'll probably be a few moments of me trying to press in the clutch and not finding a pedal there, but I'm back and we'll do our best. In the pre-trip this week, we've got a new segment I'm calling the Bulletin Board. We'll talk about the Fuel Island Etiquette Quiz. And the last pre-trip topic, I'll share some thoughts on my trip back home to Minnesota. I think I'm going to flip the script a little bit this week. We're going to do the interview first and then do the money line. For the interview this week, I'll talk with a longtime friend of mine, Verlen Larsen. We'll talk a little old-time trucking. Not to age you there, Verlen, but one generation before my career started, so he's got a little bit different perspective. And we'll talk a little bit about a post that he made on LinkedIn this week talking about English language proficiency. That kind of sparked us syncing up this week and wanting to talk about that a little bit more. In the money line this week, I've got a little bit of additional commentary on the English language proficiency discussion that I had with Verlin, then we'll wrap it up with the post trip. Let's get this rig rolling. If you're not driving, it's a great time to like, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends.
10-4 drivers, welcome to the Channel 19 Experience Trucker Podcast. This is where the real stories roll, straight from the blacktop.
Paper breaker 19, can I get a radio check? Pretty quiet out here on Channel 19. Well, there's a plain white rapper taking pictures at the state line. Hit the jake brake quick, we ain't paying no fines. The driver swing into the interstate, body shop south at exit 5. Building trucking ain't the same as it was. We're the last of our kind.
Grab that safety vest and let's go do our pre-trip. So first up, the new segment, I'm calling it for now at least, the bulletin board. I plan to grab a couple social media posts from the week, whether that's Facebook, TikTok, Reddit, and discuss them here at the top of the pre-trip. Could be funny ones, bizarre ones, downright stupid ones. People are confused. Who knows what pattern of selection will develop here over time. But this week I spotted one post on Reddit, and it was interesting to me to watch the comments play out and kind of what happened in that interaction. So the post was titled, "Where to Slide Tandems." I'll read the quick post to you, what the person said. "What's up, guys? I have 6 months experience, so trying to gather as much intel as I go. I run a 53-foot reefer, and my loads are always between 38K to 48K. Currently, I just drive with the tandems all the way back, but of course now that makes turns super wide. When you guys are running 40K, what hole do you use?" All right, so the post opens up some can of worms, and at first I thought I screenshotted it because I wanted to come back to it. I knew I wanted to discuss it somehow. And then it turns out the OP, the original poster, had deleted it. And so I was like, oh, darn, this was good content and now it's gone. And as you can imagine from what I read of the post, the comments didn't exactly go as the OP had planned. But I did find a little trick. So if you're on Reddit and you come into this situation, you can go into your profile and you click on your profile and you can find threads that you commented on. And even if they're deleted, you're still able to see everything that was there before it was deleted. So I was in luck. I got to go see all the comments again so we can discuss it. As you can imagine, the comments were mixed. There were some constructive answers coming in early on with links to videos, variety of ways of kind of describing the same general thoughts around what the OP was asking for. And then some of the pushback began from the OP. I don't drive in states with bridge laws. I've never had a problem yet with how I'm doing it. And some of the comments started to roll in that were just like, you're good. Just keep doing what you're doing, buddy, if you don't want to listen to any of the advice being given. And, aside from the obvious of who would want to drive with their tandems all the way back on a 53-foot trailer in the first place, and, with 6 months of experience from the driver and having the tandems all the way back, like that's not a very good recipe for avoiding incidents. Then combine that with the general lack of understanding of why you wouldn't want to make the assumptions the OP is making that all the way back is always legal. Because let's face it, depending on how the freight's loaded, the density of the freight, how the weight is distributed, you very well could have problems on your hands. But the thing that out of all of it that struck me the most was how the conversation was genuinely struggling to resonate on the OP. Part of it seemed to be the OP's unwillingness to accept that this wasn't going to be an easy answer of pick a hole, set it, and forget it. Their current method, while it has, I guess, worked so far, wasn't likely to work forever. So a couple lessons it made me think of as I read through this. Number one, don't assume because something appears to have worked to date that it's the correct answer. Now, there's a word for this, and I'll go a little nerdy here because I like to study such things, and it's called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is that people tend to favor information that confirms their existing beliefs and discount other information that may prove contrary to their original personal experience or existing beliefs. Confirmation bias is a very dangerous thing, and I see it all the time, happens all the time. We are constantly subject to it because we value our own personal experiences and the lessons that we've learned. But this leads me to number two. If you're going to ask for help with something, be open to receiving answers that aren't what you wanted to hear, or that aren't simple, or that aren't confirming of your original biases. The OP got a lot of great information. I contributed a little bit, but a bunch of others tried in various ways to explain and get valuable information to the OP. But in the responses the OP was giving to some of them, you could tell they just had a sound. Now, maybe this wasn't intended, but as we know, text or written communication leaves out some context. But they appeared to sound a little bit dismissive of very good, appropriate, and well thought out answers. People invested time giving those answers. And they were very good answers from somebody who knows why the current approach is likely not to succeed forever. Now, one thing the OP kind of set themselves up for failure with was they asked a specific question, which is good. Ask a specific question, which was, which hole do you use for a 40K on a 53-foot reefer? But don't let your framing of the question in your mind or in your words limit your ability to hear valuable information or the right answer. You can box your mind in to what the possible answers are, sometimes by how you frame the question. Now, for the culture of truckers helping other truckers to work, it has a couple of requirements. First, which we met here in this post, people with knowledge being accessible via Reddit in this case, and being willing to share that knowledge is one of the requirements. But people looking for that knowledge, being willing to actually listen is another key requirement. Hopefully the OP deleted the post and then found another way to get the right information before they drive themselves nuts being stretched out like that all the time, or some other of the bad potential scenarios happen, like catching a pole, hitting another truck in a truck stop, overweight ticket, etc., from just being too long for too many scenarios that you need to be and making life difficult for yourself. I'll post a question on Facebook too if you want to chime in on some of your thoughts about why this is not the appropriate way to approach pulling a 53-foot trailer, and we can continue the conversation there. Let's jump into the next topic, Fuel Island Etiquette. All right, so a couple weeks back, I posted my document for Fuel Island Etiquette, kind of laid out some of the tenets of good Fuel Island etiquette. And this week, I followed that up with a link to a quiz that covers a bunch of the content from the one-pager Just a quick reminder, in case you didn't see it on Facebook, Facebook has a tendency to hide content that you might want to see and bury it under a bunch of other stuff like the ads they're receiving money to promote instead of the stuff that you actually have indicated you want to see. So if you want to combat that, there's a quick way to do it. If you click on any page that you really like their posts, hopefully that's ours. On the right-hand side, there's a little, usually three dots. You click on it and click on following, and then it'll let you choose to make it a favorite, or I think even on some versions, you can just click make it a favorite. But that'll get it back fighting upstream against the deluge of ads and other content that they're trying to promote to you, as opposed to the stuff that you already indicated you really wanted to watch. So anyway, I've got the quiz up on a Facebook post on our page. There's just a link to a Google form. It's 13 questions, 80% to pass, 80% correct, that is. And if you pass, you get a little certificate via email. I posted a picture of that for my successful exam. I mean, I wrote the quiz, so thankfully I could still answer all 13 questions right. There's no trick questions in here, just to have a little fun related to Fuel Island etiquette. We've had a couple people take it already, all 13 out of 13 scores, so the bar's been set quite high. Now, mile marker Mike, he thinks he passed, but he only passed the preliminary test version that only had one question. So, little brother trucker, you need to go retake your quiz and get a legitimate certificate, because there's 12 new questions that you've got to answer correctly. We'll have more quizzes to come. Next up in the queue is parking lot etiquette, which, judging by some posts I've seen this week, we might have to add some pointers about not shooting at one another over parking spots, but we'll get those parking lot etiquette points kicked out to you hopefully this week, and then we'll get a quiz to follow on that one. I've also got the new website on the way, which allows me, at least for somebody who is not a website developer, allows me to add content like this more in a way that I'd like to. And so we'll get that released here soon, and then there'll be a ton of information up there on a variety of topics related to etiquette on the road, in the parking lot, in the truck stop. We've already covered the fuel island. There's lots of places where etiquette is seemingly missing or degraded, so we've got work to do. Now, I was thinking about it, I might add a couple demographic questions just to see how the data falls. Maybe some questions like, are you a company driver? Are you an owner operator? Maybe what age group do you fall in? And maybe we can pit group against group and see if the results play out the way that we think they do when it comes to trucking etiquette. Most of the posts on social media about trucking etiquette tend to lean towards the older drivers know the etiquette, the younger drivers not as much. Maybe that's not how the data plays out. Maybe the results will surprise us. Either way, get on there, take the quiz, share with your friends, have some fun with it, shoot it over to your dispatcher, see if they know anything, send it over to your friends, challenge them to beat your score. You can print those certificates out, stick them on your fridge in your truck, email them home. Your kids can admire your proficiency in truck driver etiquette, and we'll keep rolling out the quizzes from there. Final topic this week on the pre-trip. Some thoughts that I had from my trip back home to Minnesota. Most of the week, well, I was up there about 10 days or so, was in the Twin Cities, working for me and a little bit of babysitting the 3-year-old granddaughter. My wife had the week off from work, but she was doing all the heavy lifting, chasing the 3-year-old around. Even in my part-time role of chasing a 3-year-old around, there were plenty of sore muscles and muscles I hadn't used chasing a 3-year-old across parks and other things that she thought was funny. But then for a few days, I headed out to Western Minnesota, back to my hometown, my home county, to visit family. I'll post a bunch of photos that I took while I was out there. You know, due to the timing of some of the things, people I was meeting up with, things that were on my schedule, I had some spare time, and I was able to do some things a little bit differently than a normal trip. I was able to take some things slow, and I was able to stop and take a bunch of pictures. It was nice to have the extra time to put it in neutral, sometimes put it in park, and pause and reflect on things. I meandered down a bunch of back roads, gravel roads, paved roads, In some cases, the Minnesota Department of Transportation helped make me wander around a little bit more than I planned on. So that was fun too. There were some roads close to home I don't even know if I'd ever been on. Thanks to the orange barrels and road closed signs, I ended up meandering around quite a bit. I stopped in places I normally wouldn't stop. I got out and I walked around and I thought about things, recorded some videos, took some pictures, noticed a bunch of things I probably hadn't noticed before, or at least hadn't noticed in quite a while. And a lot of it was from stuff that I've talked about on previous podcast episodes. Some of it's stuff other people have brought up, Danger Dave, Mile Marker Mike, other folks who are from that part of the world or grew up in that part of the world. It was fun to revisit even some recent memories and recent conversations in real life. Some of it was sad to see businesses that are gone, homes that are gone, or things that are in not great states of repair. But there was lots of good things, new businesses, different businesses going up in many cases, even some new housing development, which was kind of a surprise to me. I went into some towns and saw new houses going up. I'm like, wow, that's really nice to see that it's not just doom and gloom for America and always shrinking. Even new neighborhoods was really nice to see them going up and being filled by new generations of people out in that area. One of the things that surprised me most was how many of my memories, especially as I wandered off beaten paths of things, roads I hadn't driven on in 30 years, how many things were really quite different in reality from my memories. For example, back in episode 1, I talked about my first truck driving job. And I talked about the experience of getting hired for that job and my first trip in that job, not knowing what I was doing as far as driving, especially driving a truck type I'd never been into, a circa 1970 International Harvester cab over engine with a 13 speed with all the button labels worn off. And having the owner, Clarence, watching me drive off towards my first load, having met me about 15 minutes earlier and hired me about 5 minutes after that. And in my mind, how long that driveway was to get from where he handed me the keys to basically down the road and out of sight. And I went down that gravel road again because I wanted to compare my memory to reality. And I drove past Clarence's place there, and a lot of things have changed in 32 years. Buildings are gone, new buildings are up, lots more trucks than they had in the past, a lot of equipment around, new big gravel lot that wasn't there 32 years ago. But the thing that caught my attention the most was is that driveway is really short. And in my memory, that memory is kind of like one of those Arizona, northeastern Arizona roads leading up to like Monument Valley where you can look down the hill and off into the distance and up a little rise on the other side. And you're basically looking out at, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 miles of highway in one view. Like that's kind of what the picture was in my mind. I mean, I knew the driveway wasn't 20 miles long. In my mind, it was probably more like half, 3/4 of a mile. But now that I'm sitting there looking at it, parked in front of it, I realize, well, that one building was there when I was there, and the truck was parked right next to that building. And I'm sitting on the road, and that thing can't be more than 200 yards away. It was quite startling in some cases to see the difference when put up side by side like that in a moment. So I moved on from there, went over to a sugar beet piling station because I hadn't been on one of those in about a quarter of a century. I took some video of that and some photos there, which I'll share. Not much has changed in the sugar beet piling station business, it doesn't look like. I'm sure some of those machines are ones that I drove up on. I walked up around one, and actually it was interesting because I probably, in all the loads I hauled on both the semi dump side on the right hand side in the pictures where they side dump the beets off the trailer to the left, or on the left hand side where you back up a tandem axle dump truck and then a little, let's say, a guard pops up to deflect the beets into the little conveyor belt that feeds them up into the piler and out the big piling boom out the back end. I probably never looked at it as close as I had on that day. Some thoughts ran through my mind as I was looking at things. Like when I was on the semi truck side, I was like, even though I'm standing up here right now, like I can't remember exactly where you would stand when they dumped the trucks. Did like I climb all the way up those stairs so that the person could see me in the little operator's cab there? I'm sure somebody listening does. Remind me where you stand when all this is going on because I couldn't remember. And I also realized I've never talked or I didn't know anybody who actually operated the thing, which is weird because you know a lot of people in a small town, but I never talked to anybody who ran it other than flipping the gate up and dumping the trucks over on the side. I don't know how much of that is automated or manual or what a person does in there. So at some point, I'm going to want to talk to somebody to hear what it's like up there in that little operator's cab. And now that I think of it, a couple itches came back. Being up there, I kind of wanted to go haul a load of sugar beets again, to be honest. It was fun. It was hard work. They were long hours. I also got a bit of an itch to go run that whole piling machine and see what that's all about. So I'm going to have to talk to somebody and see how I get myself up there to see how this thing works. So who knows? Mile marker Mike, Danger Dave, you might see me in the fall awkwardly hanging out around piling stations. I mean, it looks like a really fun job up there now. I mean, in the 90s, maybe it was really boring, but now with a cell phone, like you probably listen to podcasts or audiobooks up there all day long, I'm hoping. And then it makes it a really appealing job. Like I could do that for a 12-hour shift for a month. After that, I went down the road into Bird Island, small town. When I grew up, it was 1,000 people. Looks like roughly about the same amount of buildings. Stopped on Main Street, looked around, took a little video, some photos. Some of the businesses have changed, of course, but other than that, pretty much the same couple of blocks that I grew up with. I wandered around town a bit, saw our old house that we lived in, went to see if I could remember where some of my childhood friends had lived. I found out that my memory's not nearly as good. If you'd have told me if I could drive up to any one of those houses, I would have said absolutely. The picture is clear in my mind. And then when I got there, I realized, yeah, I don't remember anymore. And we're talking about a town that's maybe 10 blocks by 15 blocks, maybe 15 by 15 blocks, 3 houses up each side, maybe 4 houses up each side, and an alley down the middle. So you'd think a person would be able to find some things. And I probably drove right by some of the houses and it just didn't look the same and I couldn't place it. So it was interesting to see that I couldn't recall nearly as many things as I thought I could. So it was fun to go see it again and refresh some of those memories in my mind. One of the things that caught my attention was how much smaller everything seemed. And of course, I grew up in a number of different little small towns in that area, went to a few different schools during my school years. And so, it wasn't like I lived in the same spot for, you know, my first 18 years. So my memories are a little bit broken up, but, and it didn't matter which town I went into, everything seemed so much smaller. Houses seem smaller. The distance between things seems smaller. My memories are based on a kid's perspective on how long it takes me to walk and how slow time seems to move when you're a kid and how long it seems to take to get anywhere when your mind's going a million miles an hour as a kid. And even the time between towns, like I remember thinking as a kid, like the 5 miles, like if we ever had to drive to the next town over to the west, which was Olivia, if we had to drive over there, which we didn't often, right? It's funny how times have changed that way as well. But if we had to drive over there, it was like roll your eyes, shoulders slumped. Oh my God, we got to drive 5 miles over there. It's going to take 5 or 6 minutes. And you can literally see Olivia from the outskirts of Bird Island. Like it's not that far away. But as a kid, it seems like the end of the world to have to make a journey like that. Like, are we gonna pack for this trip or what? So I wandered around town a little bit, ran into a few other memories. I went by the main city park. And it's funny, I pulled up at the main city park and just paused for a moment to look around. And the first thing that popped into my mind was I got my ass kicked right there on that spot. That was the first time I ever lost a fight was right there. I mean, I probably lost fights as a little kid, just goofing around as an elementary school or kindergartner, first grade, just screwing around, playing playing basketball or some other sport. But that was the first time I remember just really getting whooped. It was indisputable. And it was funny that that memory first came to mind. I was like, right there on that spot, that kid whooped me. And he whooped me good too. He put me in a headlock and I was cooked. I stood a little bit further away from that kid the next times I smarted off to him. And to be honest, I managed to escape being in a headlock by an enemy in a serious situation ever since. So it was a lesson that's stuck with me probably 30 some years. Some lessons last a long time, and I'm glad I remembered that one. Next up, I wandered over to Olivia, like I said, 5 miles to the west. Did much of the same. Wandered around looking for things I could remember. Found some of them, didn't find others. I went out to the infamous or famous corn cob. I actually went inside the building that the corn cob is perched on. And I'm kind of sure that's the first time I've ever been inside that little room. There's a bunch of information in there. Who knew? It talks about why we're the corn capital and why the hell is just corn cob standing on top of the building anyway. I spent a little bit of time and took some pictures of those and I read those. Growing up, I thought our designation as corn capital was maybe a good marketing idea and gave some credence to behind roasting a bunch of corn in the summertime and eating it. But come to find out, it's actually more of an official thing than I thought. They had all kinds of information about the tonnage and bushels per acre and all kinds of things justifying our right to be called the corn capital, not to be confused with some phony imposter corn capital over in Michigan. We're the true corn capital, not them. And it made me smile to think about my little contribution in those years to more than 100 years of corn production here in the corn capital of Minnesota. Later that day, I made it over to visit the legend. He was on his way back home from a business appointment. And so I got to go over and meet up with him and spend a few hours with him. And I'll talk about that conversation and what that was like in the next episode. That's all for this week. The pre-trip is complete. No defects detected. But that's just my opinion. If you find some defects, let me know. As I mentioned earlier, after a quick break here, we'll get started with the interview with Verlen, and then I'll hit the money line afterwards. Get that seat adjusted, push the buttons in. We've got work to do.
It's by truckers for truckers. This is the Channel 19 Experience. Let's hit the road.
TrueTMS is a cloud-based transportation management system. Being in the cloud makes integrations faster and you're able to access the platform from anywhere. It has intuitive planning, on-demand reporting, and easy order creation, rating, and invoices, which turns tedious admin work into streamlined automated workflows. And TrueTMS ensures your team feels supported throughout the entire process. The folks at TrueTMS have decades of trucking and liquid experience, and they care about this industry. They don't just sell you a product, they're invested in your success. Visit their website, truetms.com, and of course, tell them Channel 19 sent you.
More than anything, this show's about bringing back the sense of community we used to find on the CB, especially good old Channel 19. No rants, no corporate spin, just long-form storytelling from someone who's been behind the wheel, built the fleet, hit rock bottom, and climbed right back up.
Today, we've got a chance to speak with one of my longtime friends, all around great guy, longtime trucking guy. I mentioned him on a Facebook post the other day because he shared out a great little tune about chickens and every other thing under the sun. Welcome, my good buddy. Good to see you, Verlen Larsen. How are you today?
I'm great, Tony. Great to see you. I was kind of joking in my head earlier that I have to come on your podcast for us to get a chance to talk anymore. You're so busy. So,
well, I get distracted by folks sending me chicken songs and
well, and that was a long song too.
yeah, but it spoke to my heart, and because that's kind of what you and I relate on the fact that Wandering Minds and that song kind of sums up a lot of what the inside of our heads look like on many days. Wait, what are we talking about? Chickens or
So often start at the absurd and try to work towards normal, but I don't know if we ever get there.
Yeah, we usually can't find a U-turn point and just keep on going.
I guess we're old truckers, huh?
Yeah. Wait for the next exit. Maybe it'll
That's
turn
right.
out better.
Hopefully you're not in West Virginia where their exits are 30 miles apart, you know?
Yeah. Before we get jumped into the discussion about your post on LinkedIn earlier this week, let's talk a little bit about you and share your background because you've been around trucking a heck of a long time.
Yeah, a couple minutes.
Yeah, a couple minutes. So, how did it all begin? What was your trucking journey like?
So I grew up in trucking. My first job was 10 years old, changing oil and greasing trucks on my mom and dad's trucks in a rural area of Nebraska. Then I went with dad, and later I started driving, did that for about 10 years professionally. Started when I was still a little bit too young to do it. That's probably some stories for another day too. But I suppose I made money changing oil and greasing trucks, but I made more hauling, swinging meat into New York City. And so that was kind of the driving part. And then just sort of morphed into a lot of different jobs within my family's business. I dispatched and brokered. And of course, when I was brokering, you've heard me joke that we had a yellow pad and a rotary dial phone. There was no load boards or even computers at the time. Kind of gradually, I guess, did what was in front of me, and it eventually did some corporate leadership for the family business. I drove for another company, managed some other fleets, and got into safety. Eventually got the opportunity to go work on a team of industry experts that set up a kind of a different kind of a driving academy. And eventually they called it the Harvard of driving schools. I don't know if we earned that or not, but it was different and pretty effective, I think. But from there, then that kind of led to an opportunity to found a rapid training company for truck drivers and bus drivers. So we did that for a few years, and then led some sales, management, and training teams in like corporate settings, led a couple of IT firms, automotive aftermarket type sales, and training. And you've heard me joke, Tony, about the trucking business or transportation being a little bit like the mafia. Once you're in, you can kid yourself, but you're probably not getting out. And so I seem to always end up back in the trucking industry. So here probably 12 years ago or so, I landed in the tech for transportation, and that's where you and I met, and we've kind of we've been on a few different gigs together, and so that's been a fun ride. And just I've always sort of had a bent for technology, and so applying that to a business that I have been in for a long time has been really, really. I For some reason the term joyful experience came to mind, so we'll just go with that. Sometimes it was more joyful than others. I'll just say that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's funny how a little bit of, a bit of trucking knowledge mixed with a little bit of, you know, imagination can lead a
Yeah.
lot of different directions in this business, right? I mean,
Well,
there's a lots of ways to apply trucking knowledge to something around the trucking
yeah.
business.
So many parallels, right? Like, and now, so I kind of try to make my lot in life, just working with trucking companies, tech startups, some investment firms, to kind of help them kind of better define the problems they're trying to solve, and sort of what I call the painful present, and then sort of crystallize what a better future or fabulous future looks like for them, and really draw that out in a visual way, and validate that, and then plan how to execute, and then even help them go execute if they want that help. And so just providing them some visual collateral to really help both with the imagination stage and even then to the execution stage. And I just that's a blast for me. I really have a lot of fun doing that. So to your point, um, driving up and down the road doesn't seem like it necessarily relates to deeper business things or problem solving things, but what do you have but time for solving problems? You're just doing it in your head, and maybe you can do it later in reality. So
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think, you think about being a truck driver or anywhere in the trucking equation, right? Whether you're in dispatch, whether you're in planning, whether you're in sales, trying to find the right lanes, like it's
mhm.
problem solving, right?
Yeah,
You know, air light pops up or air pressure drops in your truck, you're in problem solving mode.
A little more
Truck
urgent
breaks
than
down and
most.
you got to find a recovery driver, problem solving mode, right? And like
Yep.
you spend 95% of your you spend 5% planning in trucking, whether you're wherever you're at in trucking, and then about 95% recovering from the realities that happen to your plan.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good life preparation school too, right? It's
Boy,
just
for
in
sure.
general, like the percentage of time that things go to as planned is pretty low. So you get
Pretty
to,
minuscule.
yeah, you spend a lot of time scrambling.
When it
Why?
is, you wonder what you didn't get, right? When things go actually right to plan, then you go, what am I missing here?
Yeah, which report didn't I run? Which thing didn't I look at? Because this feels way too good to be comfortable.
Start looking over your shoulder for the head slap that's coming.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I see, and I'm with the podcast especially, I find myself poking around Reddit, Facebook,
Yeah.
TikTok, just seeing what people are talking about.
Hmm.
And one of the common themes that kind of relates to a couple guys like you and I is you see either, and this includes, some of the overseas groups that I'm in too, the English language ones, because I don't speak any other languages well enough to understand what's going on. But, like in the UK or Australia, especially, um, you have either people who are in some sort of office job or some other job, could be in a warehouse, could be anything else but driving a truck, looking at maybe I should jump into trucking. And then on the flip side, the next post is, hey, I'm really hate this OTR stuff and I got to get out, I got, like my family life's degrading or I'm driving myself mad out here alone or whatever the case might be. I'm not making any money. Looking at the other side, going, how the hell do I get out of the truck?
Right.
And you and I have been a couple of guys who have bounced back and forth a number of times between
Mm.
in the cab, out of the cab into some professional, so back into the cab, over to some other professional setting. And I mean, it's a continuous dynamic, right? Because
Mhm.
it's challenging to be behind the wheel for long periods of your life. And so but it's also hard in its own way to sit behind a
Mhm.
desk and go, Jesus, I'm bored out of my mind looking out the same window at the same robin
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a different set of problems in a different space, and you're still solving problems. And I think that there's a little bit, this isn't something, I don't think you and I've really talked too much about this before, but I think that the one thing that sort of attracts us back to the road is just that sort of romantic aspect of, I mean, as many things as I really didn't enjoy about when I was driving in particular, when you break over a mountain and the sunrise is coming and you've been working towards that sunrise for 6 or 8 hours, that's a beautiful moment in the life of a truck driver, especially if there's a great song on the radio or on your whatever you're listening to. And so that romance stays in our heads. And I think, or at least for me, it looms a little bigger. So there's times when I still get sort of enticed to go, maybe I should go do that. And it's like, you are insane.
Yeah, I'll get it too. Or like my wife knows that the itch is always there for me to
Hmm.
just go the heck with it all. Let's go buy a truck and go trucking.
Hmm.
And she'll see it because of course we're on the same Wi-Fi network. And next thing you know, she's getting ads about brand new, Kenworths, and she's like, what have you been doing over there? Like, don't tell me you've hatched another scheme to go buy a truck. And I'm like, how do you even know? I mean, I was looking at it's the last model of W900s they're ever going to make, honey. I mean, like, we, maybe we should buy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but back to kind of hopefully trying to weave a couple concepts here together that we talked about is just the allure of it, but also the reality of it, leading you to, a person to want to go, I think I need a break from this, whichever this it is at the moment, whether you're in the
Mhm.
cab or out of the cab. But to me, the thing that resonated was like, it's the same sales pitch. Like you look at guys like you and I, we didn't have any special, uh, let's say, we're not PhD graduates from, whatever, MIT.
Mhm.
I mean, I mean, maybe you are and you've never told me, but I'm assuming you would have told me by now. Um, so it's not like we had some magic key to get out from behind the wheel, because that's what a lot of the questions are. Like, how do I get out from behind the wheel and not go to entry level 18 bucks an hour warehouse job and lose my house and my car and my wife and the dog and everything else? Um, and so, but also you got the other people who are making, $20 an hour, $25 an hour going, I want to get behind the wheel of a big rig and go try that for a while. How do I do it? And what it got me to thinking was it's the same sales pitch.
Mm,
It's just because it's all problem solving,
yeah.
right? I mean, once you pass the initial hurdle of, whatever the minimum criteria is, in the case of driving a truck, it's a
Mm,
CDL
mhm,
and, some degree of experience usually. But you can find places that'll take you on without experience. You'll find places that'll train you. So that's not really that much of a barrier. I mean, as long as you don't have any sort of bad driving record and you got,
mhm,
reasonable functionality of your body, then you can probably be a truck driver.
mhm,
Um, the but so it's all about the sales pitch. How do you convince somebody that I can problem solve enough things that you don't have to babysit me 24 hours a day to figure out where I'm going to park my truck every night, where I'm going to go to the bathroom every few hours, what to do if a tire falls off, should I
mhm,
just keep going? Like just reasonable logic and deduction. Can you?
mhm.
And flip side, most of the jobs that you and I got that were not in the cab, it was about convincing them, hey, I can reasonably deduce and problem solve,
Mhm.
and I don't need a babysitter to do it,
Yeah.
right? I don't need a hand
Yeah.
holding the entire step of the way. You may want to go, that's not how I would have done it, and course correct me, but we can still work with that, and I'm not going to blow up and, throw my
Right.
desk across the room.
Right. Yeah. I'm not gonna sell the farm, your farm, as it were, in the process of trying to solve my problem. And that's a really important thing that you just said, I think, Tony, which is, people need to see, I think, the quality of our thinking, the quality of our assessment of the problem and possible solutions, and then even the quality of our action to go try to solve that or plan the actions to solve it or lead other people to solve it, or all of that is under skepticism or review. And I think that's what earns us, if we if we if we can, we'd hope that that would earn us some level of credibility with the people that would engage us, whether that's to be a planner, a dispatcher, a consultant, a teacher, whatever that is.
Yeah. And I see it, you and I both saw it, right? Being kind of the little bit of the weird outsiders in a lot of the business areas that we went to because we were guys who didn't come up, through the, you know, go to college, go into a career, stay in that
Mhm.
career path for 30 years and, we wandered around. We didn't take the typical path like a lot of truck drivers don't. And just being inside those organizations that are largely made up of not truck drivers
Mhm.
and even people who haven't been inside of trucking companies,
Yeah.
especially in like the tech realm,
Yeah.
right? Which is understanding the value you can bring and figuring out how to sell that to people, but also the intangible things that are on your resume that don't often get talked about. Because if you look at a guy or a woman, Yo-Yo passed away here this last week, and you look at her accomplishments as a truck driver over the time span of from the 70s up into the, 90s, early 2000s, I think, the amount of problems that she had to solve
Mm.
largely in that time period on your own or with the help of friends and being able to interpersonally relate and network with other people and communicate with them without driving them all off.
Right.
Because, your help is, on the side of the road in the 90s or, before then, if you were a jerk, the people would just, hey, I'm gonna go back to my cabin. Next thing you know, you'd see a trail of dust and black smoke, and your help would be gone. You
Yeah.
had to know how to network. You had to have interpersonal skills. You had to have problem solving and ingenuity and working on teams to solve problems with mixtures of parts and solutions and knowledge about the problem, all in the moment, whether it's 100 degrees or 20 below.
Yeah.
And like all those things are great skills to have for a lot of these other applications in various business settings.
Yeah. On the surface, I think like on the surface, how is laying under a truck when it's 20 below outside trying to thaw out a fuel line? Um, and then maybe realizing you have some other problem, you got an injector stuck or something, whatever the problem might be. And when you and I were doing it, especially when I was doing it, you were you were your own sort of troubleshooting and execution machine. And I wasn't carrying a cell phone at the time. And if I had a problem, it was very likely not to be near a payphone. And if
Right.
I did get to a payphone, my mom doesn't know how to solve this problem, and my dad's probably on the road. So you just sort of figured it out. And frankly, if we didn't known some of the problems we were going to have to solve, I don't know that we would have started. You
Right.
know, just you go, well, I'll figure it out. Well, but this is a little bit deeper too, but like I think that's sort of the American way. Like our pioneers, they got in a ship and went for what, a month or whatever, and suffered scurvy and death and starvation, and then they got here, and yeah, all that stuff. Well, they kind of started with that same. I can't compare my experience with theirs. I'm just saying that I think in a lot of ways, if we knew from the beginning, whether it's starting a business or moving to a new country and trying to settle it, if we knew what it was going to entail, we'd run screaming into the woods before we even started.
Oh, heck, being a parent, throw that into the mix too.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
If you really read the whole brochure, you'd be like, well, maybe
Well,
celibacy is a pretty good idea at this
well,
point.
if they actually put all the facts in the brochure, that would be, but I don't know that they would fit.
Right. Yeah, and I mean that's the thing, right? And it got me thinking about, because I managed some teams in dispatch offices, right? Significantly sized teams, big trucking companies. And I was just thinking about the mindsets of some of the guys in particular, because I don't think I had any woman ex-truckers on any of my teams. But
Hmm.
the guy ex-truckers, as compared to the mind, and there is kind of that, because you're going to grow up real fast out there, behind the wheel, especially in the days where you were on your own. Like
Hmm.
my Uncle Larry, when drivers would leave out of the yard, right? He would peel off some $100 bills and hand them to you, and away you went, right? Good luck,
Yep.
son. Godspeed.
Yep.
Um, and so it built within a whole generation of people a certain ruggedness, a certain
Mm.
independence, a certain self-reliance that you saw play out even when those folks got later in their careers and they were working on my teams in dispatch rooms of, yeah, they didn't raise their hand and go, boss, can you help me, nearly as much as
Right.
the people who had never been in an experience that kind of hardened their determination to be like, I don't need your, like, I'll let you know when I need some help.
Hmm.
Like, I will
Yeah.
have tried everything I could to figure it out before I was going to ask somebody else a question, just because they had gotten in the habit of not having anyone to ask for so much of
Right.
their life or their
Yeah. Well,
career.
if you're on the top of one of the Three Sisters in Wyoming and you run out of fuel, well, that's my problem to solve. Thankfully for me, that in this real case, I was pulling a reefer with a full tank of fuel. Nowadays, you'd be putting undyed or dyed fuel into an engine, which you could get in trouble for. But I had to go get fuel out of my reefer tank to put in well, it's cold out there and you're by yourself. It's 12:30 in the morning, but there's nobody, like the saying, nobody's coming to save you. Figure your crap out.
Well, there
And
was also, oh, go ahead.
there's value in that. I
Yeah.
not that I would put that on anybody, but there is value. It's schooling.
Well,
So.
there's a certain aspect of it you made me think of right there. Because I've been in some stupid situations, especially back pre-cell phone days.
Mhm.
And even, I was an owner operator, so, there was just a certain line that you like if I called, and the company that I was leased on to mainly was, or the companies, they were largely all owner operator groups. So like the person you were calling. He was going to be no help. He didn't own any trucks. He just had an authority and some, he was a good salesman,
Yeah.
or she was, um, in the case of Viking Land. And she could round up freight and hustle freight, and she was great at it. But like, she wasn't going to solve your engine problems,
Right.
right? She
Yeah.
wasn't going to tell you what to do next. In fact, she'd largely think less of you for having resorted to calling her or him.
How did you not know I was not going to be helpful in
Yeah,
solving the
like that just
problem?
shows an extra layer of stupidity that I didn't know you were capable of, but now you've shown you are.
Yep.
But anyway, like there was a reality, kind of almost like being a kid, where if you did something dumb and you ended up on the side of the road, you had to look the people in the face who you were going to need their help from, and they were going to look at you like, Jesus, you're stupid, aren't you, bud?
Well, in some ways, you kind of hope they were a stranger that you could hopefully never see again.
Yeah.
You had to admit your idiocy to.
Yeah, you didn't need somebody with, your home state,
Mhm.
license plate rolling up on you going, oh God, this guy's gonna know my dad
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, yeah, or they're, trying to run the scales in Iowa, coming home with a load of steel that I knew was illegal when I loaded it, but it's a weekend, and so I run the scales and go around them, and I'm out. It's winter time, and I'm out on the country roads, turn one too short, and drag my trailer into the ditch. Now I got to flag down a farmer coming by, and he throws a chain on, and I give him $20, and fortunately, it pulled me out. But what am I going to do if that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I mean that's, so I guess in a trucking way of wandering around till we hit a point accidentally, for the people who are looking to get in, to looking to get out, it's all the same sales pitch.
Mhm.
And largely, I mean, unless you're doing something very particular in the world, it's understand the real skills that you have,
Mhm.
put them together, get some help on a resume if you need help to explain, especially when you're trying to jump into something that you don't really know how to explain it.
Yeah.
Understand how my wife was in the same boat when she was trying to get into some stuff. And I was like, you have a ton of skills. You just don't know how to word them in a way that resonates with the people who are going to be
Oh
reading your
yeah.
application. So, you know, and if you're new and you're getting into this and life's a little bit easier because we have various technologies or resources to lean upon, in these things, I would encourage people, try to solve some things yourself and be
Mhm.
that self-reliant person. And you've got Google and YouTube and all kinds of stuff under the sun that we didn't have, that we
Mhm.
wish we would have. But also, like, absorb when the lessons are being taught. Don't just stand back, go jump back in the cab, don't pay. Like every opportunity is a learning opportunity if you're invested in paying attention to it, right? So
Yeah.
you can learn about how some of this stuff works, just because you're not the one pulling apart doesn't mean you can't be peeking over the guy's shoulder going, what the hell's inside that thing, I
Yeah.
wonder? And how
Yeah.
does it
Or
really work?
asking how he solved that problem over a cup of coffee in the truck stop.
Yeah, how did you know how did you know to look there? Because I was
Mhm.
staring at the other end of the truck thinking that the problem might be
Right.
there. And be willing to invest and pay it forward a little bit when somebody does take the time. We were blessed with a really strong culture back in those days of helping
Mhm.
each other and sharing knowledge. Part of it was just sheer loneliness and somebody
Yeah.
to talk to in the moment.
Sure.
But a lot of great people helped us figure out a lot of stuff. We would have been still sitting on some roadside somewhere
Yeah.
trying scratching our heads if they hadn't
Yeah.
come along.
I think by and large, most human beings do want to help other human beings. Oftentimes, we don't get to pay them back. We just have to try to pay it forward. And I got more to pay forward, Tony, than I could do in 5 lifetimes.
Yeah,
But you
same.
just kind of try to do what you can, and try to help other people as much as you can. And I think it makes for a better I can go to sleep at night kind of thing. I shouldn't say that's all we can hope for, but it's definitely worth a lot to be able to just go to sleep at night and feel like I didn't do everything, but I did my best. I did what I could do today.
Everybody who does that to some degree more than the minimum
Hmm.
helps raise the bar everywhere, right? Like you and I have been involved with telematics and, part of the telematics capturing fuel economy.
Hmm.
And, you watch at some fleets where they don't do anything else other than post the MPG up on the wall
Mm-hmm.
somewhere, right?
Yep.
And all of a sudden, the average starts to creep up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because other humans look at it and go, "Why is Steve getting better than me?
Mm-hmm.
I gotta think about this, because I'm better trucker than Steve for sure." Like, right? Like
We
that
are
guy,
very
that guy
competitive,
barely
aren't we?
makes it out of the yard without hitting something, and then he gets better fuel mileage than me. And then, that might lead me to go into the shop and go, Steve got a better truck than me, because it's got to be the truck, because it can't be me, right? And they're like, no, he's got the same truck as you. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it all helps. And even when it comes to courtesy and other things like that, like I looked at, Big Cal posted this week because he was turning back in his fill-in truck while his normal assigned truck was getting worked on,
Mm-hmm.
and he had done a great job and took some of the time to clean it up real good and set it up nicely for the next guy. And of course, there's going to be the pessimists in the bunch who are like, wow, why did you waste your time? It's not your problem, blah blah blah. And but Cal's perspective, same as what you're talking about, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
pay it forward, move the baseline a little bit higher, and
Yeah.
maybe somebody else is looking and would have been like, you know what, I wasn't going to do it, but now I'm going to do it. And that
Mm-hmm.
just made it a little bit better for the
Yeah.
everybody else, right? Just
Yeah.
1 inch at a time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's talk about your post on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So, Verlen posted on LinkedIn earlier this week, and of course, one of the highest temperature topics of the moment revolves around English language proficiency and enforcement of said laws.
Mm-hmm.
And so Verlin had posted on LinkedIn a graphic about impacts of English proficiency enforcement in the trucking industry. I'll share it out on the Facebook page and throw it up here on the. Well, actually, you know what? Let's go all kinds of fancy here, Verlin.
Yeah, let's do.
Since we're on
We'll see
Zoom,
what a couple of hayseeds can do with technology, right?
hang on. Let me push the clutch in and flip this button and see what happens. Everybody be quiet so we can hear if any air's leaking out or anything's grinding. Did that happen? Do you
There
see
it
it?
is. I got
Okay.
it.
You see it. It's interesting we don't see it in the meeting. I wonder what it looks like on the recording.
Yeah, I
The
don't know. We'll
experiment
find out.
continues.
That's right. At least they don't have to look at us as big as they did.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that helps. All right. So, and the reason I made a comment to Verlin, which kind of kicked off us wanting to have this discussion, was I read through it and I had some problems with some of the perspectives not exposing some of the other sides of the
Hmm.
perspectives, right?
Yep.
Kind of a little bit one-sided in some case. And to me, that's one of the most interesting things about a lot of the things that get discussed right now, whether that's tariffs, whether that's enforcement, whether that's visas, and which CDLs are we going to honor from which countries, cabotage, things like that go on, which is really you're at this crossroads of economic demands
Hmm.
and social demands of what is a fair wage, what is a fair rate, really putting our money where our mouth is. Is
Hmm.
safety important, or only when the safety person wants something and then he demands that we have to do it for safety, right? But other than that, we can just throw it out the window. So
Hmm.
anyway, a few different categories in here, and especially when you think of who really gets impacted. So of course you have the impact to the people who are trying to make a living but cannot pass this English proficiency examination
Hmm.
on the side of the road. Their perspective, which is a loss of income, puts them at risk for their family or anything else, and not just owner operators. We have immigrant truckers up in the top center, and which kind of borders on the top two boxes, both left and right. The flip side of that is economically, is that's having an impact on freight rates, right?
Hmm. For
Because
sure.
same thing with the discussion a couple weeks ago about 1099s, people who are drivers but being paid via 1099 to avoid certain taxes, certain unemployment,
Yeah.
insurance fees, things like that, work comp. It distorts the natural balance of supply and demand and the pricing that it creates and makes it difficult for the people who are following the rules,
Yeah.
right? And I think here the other big one is safety, right? That was one of the headlines that really drove the momentum to have anybody react to this. Now, I
Mhm.
think we'll probably find out that some of the assumptions that were made about those accidents and the status of the people in them and their ability to speak English or not probably doesn't play out like the headlines skewed it to
Mhm.
look. I haven't seen the data. Tell me that people who speak English are crashing less. But the ones that got me a little more interested, and I'll shut up here, I promise, and let you
Well,
was more on the bottom half of the slide, especially from the consumer standpoint. Because to me,
mhm.
that's the big rub, right? Between how much does the consumer have to pay for something when they go onto Amazon versus what is a fair wage versus who should be allowed to earn it and how do those price pressures, because that is the number one thing that's always hitting truckers economically is capitalism's reality of everybody wants it cheaper all the time
Absolutely. Yep. And faster.
and faster. Yep.
And
They
good
don't.
quality. Yeah. Yep. Well, so my dad said, and there's so many different points, and the intent of this infographic for me when I made it was to spark conversation or thought about, okay, what are some of the dimensions, yes, that maybe are covered here, but there's probably way more that aren't covered. But the idea was to spark thought and conversation around it. There are so many different aspects to the economic discussion around trucking. So I started to say, my dad used to say in the 70s, there is no shortage of truck drivers. And for background, if somebody doesn't know, trucking has been screaming for drivers since the 70s and probably well before that. But Dad said there isn't a shortage of truck drivers. There's a shortage of good paying truck driving jobs. And that was a little bit limited because I would add to that good paying for what you're doing. You're gone, maybe you're gone all week, or you have like horrible living conditions. And like your UK guy who talked about what they call them, trampers, because they'd
Mhm.
lived in a truck for a week. But the point I'm trying to make is trucking doesn't pay truck drivers, in my opinion, for what that's worth. I don't think trucking pays truck drivers for what they're doing. Like you're gone 24/7, like long haul truckers is my perspective. That's where I lived
Mhm.
a lot of years. But even if you're a drayage driver, there's conditions in your work that aren't typical of an office job. There's conditions to your job that you just can't imagine until you get into it. And so then there's the flip side of that economy, which is trucking can't really pay you what I think that would be worth because the economy won't stand for it. The people ordering from Amazon are just going to find someplace else to buy it, or Amazon's going to find some trucker who doesn't know they can't haul it for that amount until they realize they can't, and then they're going to find five more to replace them. But the point is that there's so many interconnected aspects to this whole discussion, and I think I sort of looked at two, well, really three aspects, and there's way more, but it's really circled around the English competence piece. And I found myself oddly, because I'm quite opinionated about illegal immigrants, not in an angry way, but just I think you need to figure out the right way to do it. We need to have a right way for them to do it. There's the human aspects, there's the economical aspects, and there's the operational aspects of these three groups, and they're different for each group. So there's no possible way in one single infographic or maybe a set of encyclopedias you could
Sure.
explore all of the aspects to this problem. And some of my writing about it turned into sort of sympathetic to the immigrant truckers, which I wouldn't have necessarily thought I would do until I sort of dug deeper into it. I just think there's some things missing. A lot of what leadership, whether that's in a company or a country, can tend to make underinformed decisions. I tend to be towards proactivity, but in this case, I think maybe we made some decisions that we maybe weren't equipped to think through all the ramifications. Certainly, some of them were thought through and it was intentional, but then there's others that may be unintended or unknown at this point by the people who are making the rules. I don't oppose them necessarily. I want a path to better, and I don't feel like we have that for English speakers who came here on one set of rules. The set of rules was one way. They came here, they banked everything for themselves, their family, and now they put it all on one color, and now that color changed with no options for them. This one hits close to home because I've been in trucking all my life, and then I've seen the impacts of illegal immigrants in our industry and others. But the human side of me can go, well, that guy has 2 kids. His mom and dad live with them. His wife's here. She doesn't have English, so she doesn't have a job. They're just trying to scrape by. And then all of a sudden the rule changes. Now, it's one thing if you or I get stopped in a roadside check and we got a taillight out, or even if we're overweight, that's a fixable problem in a fairly finite amount of time. If my English isn't found to be, let's even say that we have a good standard set of rules by which the inspector is going to decide whether my English is competent or unsafe, just to limit the variables. But now, if I'm put out of service on the spot because somebody deems that I'm not competent, if I'm put out of service, I can't just go change a light bulb or get weight legal, move my tandem axles. I've got to go get better at English. And I probably would be very willing to do that, but I don't have a defined path to do that even.
Well, no, even the government has said like they're hesitant to even put out what the criteria is for fear that the CDL schools and companies and individuals would just chase basically the test criteria just so they could stay compliant, but not really, because it is a gray area of, well,
Yeah.
we don't know what we're going to need to put on that sign a month from now that we need you to be, that we're trying to communicate to you. So,
Right.
you don't want people just to memorize just the shapes of the signs and the colors of the signs, right?
Right,
Like we want to be,
100%.
we want to be able to have
Yeah.
competency or proficiency mean something more than that.
Right. And I just want to say this too, just for anybody that's listening. I know you know me well enough, but my premise and my views change on a daily basis about it as I learn more. I just want us to do better. I don't want us to just say, this is how it's going to be. I think by and large, most people want to be safe and adhere to the rules. First, they have to know what the rules are. And in some cases we do, in some cases we don't. And then if I'm outside the rules, tell me what I need to do to get back inside, and I will work very hard to do that, or you should kick my butt out. I got kids and grandkids and a wife driving up and down the interstate. And so safety concerns me way more than it did when I was a young trucker driving. But what also concerns me is that studies do not apparently definitively show causality of English competence creating a large safety risk. Now, that's only one aspect of the problem, and it is a problem, but how big of a problem? Let's define that. And then if something's broken, then we should define how to fix that and how to know when the damn thing's fixed.
Yeah, and find a rational path forward.
Mm-hmm.
So my big thing and kind of the thing I was thinking about, what's my point even talking about this? What I see now is on social media, a lot of things have become, people like to start fires. They like to put a position out there just because being irritating produces clicks. Being inflammatory produces clicks. It's hard to know what is actually a genuine position that anybody wants to discuss, as opposed to like, I know you put it out to foster a discussion because that's what you always want to do, is have a discussion, because this stuff's complicated. So the thing that I landed on, you tell me what you think, is it is very complicated and muddy water trying to understand people's true motivations and rationale behind things like this. And it tends to get lost, right? You and I, as consumers, have an interest in the price being as low as possible. The lower it is, the more I can buy of stuff that I want, save for retirement, all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a beneficiary. In that respect, that part of my brain would say, pound all the truckers in here you can, drop the rates of transportation as low as you can. I was reading about in China where they've got areas of China kind of quarantined off where they're using totally autonomous trucks because they just want to eliminate the cost of a truck driver from the equation as fast as possible. And they're kind of setting deadlines for themselves of like no more than 5 years, which is wild and probably unsafe. So that's one aspect, right? On the point you just touched on, which is I've got family, I go on the road, my family goes on the road. I would like to not have to avoid people who can't read the signs when it says accident up ahead, two left lanes closed, 1/4 mile, and they start blowing by at 70
Right.
miles an hour because they couldn't read that sign and don't know what's about to happen. I don't want to
Right.
be up there at that intersection of non-English speaking person, English
Yeah.
language sign,
Yep.
or whatever the various cases are that are creating some of these things. So, and you can kind of twist the prism around a little bit degree by degree and find these various aspects of it from a consumer, from a person, from an employee, right?
Sure.
Do I
Yep.
want the whole world just coming into my realm, driving my wages down, making my business unsustainable just because nobody wanted to pay attention to what's going on at the border or immigration wise?
Mm.
No, none of us
Right.
would, right? All of us, we're very weird creatures. I want fair wages. If I
Hmm.
ask anybody individually, are you for fair wages for you? Their answer is always going to be, of course. I deserve
Hmm.
more. I work hard. No, I don't want them to come in and say you're going to take a 50% haircut because we're going to import a bunch of people who have your same skill set right into your place. And sorry, bud, but you got to take a pay cut. Nobody wants that for them.
Right.
On the flip side, as a consumer, you're like, well, that'd work out pretty sweet if my yard guy all of a sudden had twice the competition and had to drop his price by 50%, or anybody else that I'm buying things from. And this creates this tension inside of us. And that I believe is what we see continue to get exploited, right?
Hmm.
We live in a weird country or at a weird time where, and I'm from Minnesota, they are changing the names of lakes because people that they were named after 150 years ago said something unpalatable, let's say about slavery.
Mm.
Or we were changing the names in other places of, Jefferson Davis High School must be changed, statue must come down, right? We're anti-slavery. In the
Hmm.
same breath, we will outsource our labor to countries that are essentially slave labor because it
Yeah.
makes for cheaper stuff on Amazon.
Yeah.
Now, the same thing holds true because I found this very interesting. I read this study about it. We are up in arms over we have to save the planet,
Hmm.
right? We got to have DEF in our trucks because that's going to save the planet. We got to follow CARB. We got to go electrify things, even if we know that under the covers, electrification is unsustainable and not probably very good for the planet either.
Hmm.
At the same time, I believe it was Harvard did a study in a series of home improvement stores.
Okay.
Basically, they put normal lumber harvested via whatever method, and then they put another bundle of lumber right next to it that said sustainably farmed, sustainably grown, sustainably harvested, everything sustainable you could think of to put on a pile of lumber in a home improvement store. And it was priced marginally higher, like a quarter, a 2x4.
Okay.
Nobody bought the ones that were a quarter higher. Virtually no one. They just wanted the cheaper product.
Hmm.
So it's just interesting to watch the illusion of what we think is we want to say is important, but at
Yeah.
the end of the day, our behavior tells us it's about dollars and cents. For me, the
Yep.
other things don't matter that much.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's so many pieces to that too. And I mean, it's like we know what we should do, or maybe we do if we've examined our own code of ethics, personal code of ethics. But then what we do when we think nobody's looking, or when I just had a slow week and I didn't get paid as much or whatever, that my decision is probably going to be different. I like to read neuroscience and why people make decisions the way they do and the external impacts that cause that. But I think some of that comes into that buying decision or whatever action it is that I'm faced with taking or decision I'm faced with making, um, is
Or I'm
impact.
exhausted. You just
Or
get
sure. Yeah.
exhausted by
Yeah.
making these decisions. Like,
Yeah.
it used to be 20 years ago, maybe you had one item that you ever bought that had some moral dilemma that you knew of. right?
Hmm.
There's always been moral dilemmas. I mean, it was funny when I was in Birmingham, England, they were talking about the fact that Birmingham was the largest exporter of chains in the world.
Mm.
And then they talked about what those chains were being used for,
Mm.
right? Like we built this city on being the makers of chains. The guy hammering the chains wasn't sitting over there. Oh my God, what are they doing with these chains, right?
Right. Yep.
He was just like, they ordered 100 foot of chain. I got to pound out 100 foot of chain today. So there's a certain awareness now that wasn't available before, and which
Right.
has exhausted us, I think, from a decision making, which is what we see how we're getting manipulated in situations like this, where it becomes, like you said, yes, we know there are non-English proficient drivers on the highway.
Hmm.
They're going to hit stuff just like English proficient drivers, right? There's
True.
going to
Yeah.
be accidents. So we absolutely know for certain there are non-English proficient drivers getting into accidents. It would be a
Hmm.
miracle if they weren't. And we know anecdotally that they are. To your point, is it any different rate than everybody else?
Mm.
So we see people flaming the fans of,
Yeah.
well, look at these, these non-English speaking drivers are killing us, killing Americans on our roads. When is it really just a veiled discussion about economics, but the killing people on our roads gets more attention and got something done as opposed to the economic reality of we've got too many truck drivers here. And also, just like you mentioned, nobody wants to change their tune about there's a driver shortage. To your
Right.
point, there's not a driver shortage. There's a shortage of drivers who want to do that job at the pay you're offering.
Exactly. Yep.
Just like we saw in North Dakota during the oil boom,
Hmm.
I can tell you right now, if you posted a job to do those jobs out in the oil field, North Dakota or West Texas or the Marcellus Shale in Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania, at $30,000 a year, you're going to have a shortage of drivers.
Yep.
They didn't have a shortage of those drivers in North Dakota because the wages went to $100,000, $150,000 a year, and they had plenty of labor. Then
Yep.
it was a problem of where the hell do we put them all and where are they
Right.
going to sleep at night?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's easy, I think, for humans to be myopic and only focus on the things that directly impact me. And then to your point, Tony, it's also if for people who don't, let's see, how can I frame this? If somebody wants to be credible, but they don't want to do the darn work to think through stuff or to do enough research, but they can find some really flammable wood to throw on the fire that they want to stoke, that looks like the shortcut. When really, in my opinion anyway, for people that really are doing the work and think through things, you out yourself as an idiot in certain ways. But again, here, this is my opinion, doesn't have to be anybody else's, but it seems to me like there's a high percentage of people unwilling to actually do the work to try to, and I don't think human beings ever can consider all the aspects of
Mm-mm.
anything, but to try to expand that even a little bit, I feel like we all could work harder at trying to take a broader view and trying to think through more equitably problems and the solutions to those problems. Me included,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Same. So I fall in that boat too, right? Don't take the easy mental exercise out of a
Yep,
problem and
yep.
just fall for some veiled sales pitch by
Hmm.
one group or another
Yep.
and not really think about why do I really feel this way? Because let's
Yeah.
face it, you and I both studied how decisions gets made.
Hmm.
The decision gets made inside your head immediately.
Hmm.
Then you're aware of the decision that your mind already computed and
Now
it
you have to
starts to
justify.
rationalize it. Yep.
Yep.
So, the idea that you made a choice, like that choice was already sunk into your head. Now it's a matter of can you dislodge it with any other information added to the equation
Yeah.
beyond what your mind already out processed your consciousness towards. And
Yeah.
so that's the real trick. And that's what takes energy, right? Our brain is a very expensive machine to run sitting on top of our shoulders.
Yep.
And the question is, are you going to put the coins in to make it run, to think about it a little further? And that's all that you can ask from people, is understand why you really think. Like, don't cheat yourself out of the exercise of understanding why you really feel the way you do, right?
Yeah.
I see a lot of, in the trucking community, especially because that's what I pay attention to.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of frustrated, angry people.
Yeah. The world is full of frustrated, angry
Yeah,
people.
yeah. And a lot of it seems deliberate by
Mm.
the people that are in charge. And so,
Hmm. Hmm.
your weapon against them is still the thing between your ears and
Yes.
understanding what are we really doing here? And it's okay. Like we're not all going to agree. Like just because we all sit down and think about it harder doesn't mean we're all going to come up with the same solutions because we all
Right.
value different things in different ways. That's okay.
Yep.
But we can't do is A, not think about it, and then B, not be willing to discuss it and go, what's your opinion? Right.
Right.
That's why I
Yep.
did the podcast because truckers are a great diverse group of people
Hmm.
who have different opinions and different life experiences that I have no way of knowing what that is unless I sit down and say, what do you think about this?
Right. Yeah. How did your experience lead you to where you are or your thoughts on things? And maybe this is like, let me explain something about like I had no idea that this infographic would spark this much conversation for us. I'm glad it did, but and you and I can talk about ants and talk for 3 hours. But the point about I wanted to make is I actually tried. I went and looked up all of the kind of research, used some AI to research many of the impacts on the different groups that would be impacted by this ruling, and then tried to sift through the ones that were maybe going to be most important to the people who would look at this. And then I fed it into an AI image or a infographic or a couple of them, two or three of them, to try to come up with a decent looking infographic that actually made points clear. And I eventually threw them away and built this myself because all of those that I came up with looked to me at the end like somebody just regurgitating headlines. And so that defies my goal with putting something like this out here. My goal with this was really to spark conversation and to spark thought because I know from the jump that I can't possibly consider or cover all of the different aspects thoughtfully or otherwise. And I feel like there's just too much of a glut of content that's just regurgitated, regenerated junk. And that
Mhm.
was not my goal. My goal was not to have content for LinkedIn or wherever, but rather to maybe spark a few people to think. And trucking's a niche, but every person is affected by it. And so
Yeah.
it was really it was kind of a conversation thought starter. And apparently, uh, there was actually more in it to talk about than I maybe estimated.
Yeah, I can count on you, buddy, to tickle some spots in my head and get me thinking about it too. I mean, some of the things on there too where I was like, "Yep, I forgot about that." Like that's going to have an impact too. And I mean, you even see it, right? I've seen stories now of demand for people to teach English to drivers going up. So
Sure.
like there's like a total flip side. Like all of a sudden somebody's sitting over there is like, "Why the hell is my phone lighting up because I'm an
Ah,
English as a second language teacher." So yeah, it does have all kinds of tentacles that trickle out. And that's what kind of what my point in my comment was, which is, a lot of these are kind of a singular perspective, but there's a flip
mhm.
side to almost every one of these things, which is
Absolutely.
that was probably the thing that touched on me the most because what I see a lot of in the TikToks and the other commentary that you see is there's an economic interest veiled by safety, right?
Right.
That it's a safety sales pitch on top of an economic interest.
Mhm.
And let's face it, truck drivers were taught that sales pitch by telematics companies and
Cameras.
cameras and everything else. They were told, "Hey, nobody's really all that interested in safety, but we know if we throw the safety gasoline on it, then maybe we can get the government to do something about it and mandate our product."
Yep.
So, kudos for the drivers for absorbing a lesson as they watched it played out and flip it around. But let's not fall into the same trap.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, there's a line that's probably irreverent, but I think it was the Outlaw Josie Wales, a Clint Eastwood movie from decades ago. And at one point in the movie, he said, "Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining." And
Yeah.
maybe that applies in certain ways. And I don't feel like it's my calling in life or job to just go out and shout what I think reality should be and try to make people acquiesce, but rather to try to trigger some thought around the issues. I'm just a guy, but I like to think about stuff or try to help other people think and maybe solve a problem or two here or there. And
Yeah. Well,
so,
it's funny we landed on this. I was talking to a buddy of mine, John Jones, this week. He's in the household goods moving business and has been for a long time in leadership.
mhm,
And we were just talking and we ended up kind of on the same path of we don't know all the answers individually.
right.
We understand that. I think we used to have a belief that maybe our politicians and the people that surround them cared enough to try to figure out what was the best thing to do.
Yeah.
And as we've watched this thing devolve in Washington and elsewhere, what we've realized is I don't think they care either.
Well,
I think
yeah.
they're even more susceptible to wild sales pitches. Sometimes those sales pitches include a bag of money.
Hmm.
Even though a bunch of us, a few good men and women, don't really want to have to get involved to the level that
Hmm.
is required, we kind of have to in order to make
Yep.
this thing successful because we can't count on these goofballs to care and solve the problem in a way and even have a discussion in a way that's productive to come to a
Right.
solution that might be right. I mean, we see it all the time. They consider that half the time they don't read the bills, right? They
Hmm.
openly came out and said this lad, the big beautiful bill. They didn't read it. They voted for it. They didn't read it. And we have the same problem with Obamacare and some of these other bills. So it's not just a Republican problem, it's a
Hmm.
Washington problem.
Sure.
So if they don't read the bills, then you got RFK up there talking about some of the health stuff, and he's using AI produced material that's inaccurate, citing studies that never happened, all kinds of stuff. So like
Mm.
you go, well, okay, we can't expect RFK Jr. to know everything, but certainly he's got a whole staff of people, and they probably should have Googled some of this stuff to make sure it
Right.
was real. So like the whole from the top down seems incompetent. So Verlin, we're back to square one, which is I almost feel like we're back in the George Washington days of, well, boys, I guess, and girls, I guess we got to go do this ourselves. Like, there's no more sitting on the sidelines hoping that somebody more competent's actually going to be in charge. We got to go invest the time in talking with one another, understanding each other's perspectives, and finding the middle ground because the goofballs in charge aren't going to do it.
Yeah. I've been studying some stuff about, well, there's a fellow that I've been listening to a little bit, and somebody called him a knot untire. And I haven't studied enough of that yet, but the concept to me is, and I think I don't know, but I think I see in the world a resurgence of community, a resurgence of wanting to work together in an amicable, civil way to solve problems that we all can see. Some of us have been denying them for a long time, or we'd just rather not think about them. But to your point, at a certain point, we go, well, if not me, who? If
Yeah.
not now, when? And then, but here's this other competent person over here. Maybe we could have a conversation and maybe we could come up with something better than either one of us. And I hope that that perspective is true and real. And I guess I feel like in a certain way, my job is to try to encourage that, be encouraged to do that myself, just to connect people in a civil and cooperative, collaborative way, because the problems we have are not getting smaller.
And
As
people are
time goes
getting
on.
hurt.
Yeah,
People are
bad.
financially hurt, physically hurt. People are dying because we can't solve anything out in sensible places. Like,
Mhm.
and the same thing about turning a blind eye to what goes on in China to manufacture these goods or some of these other countries. We can't just turn a blind eye to that. Like, these are human beings and people whose lives they have value.
Mhm.
Um, to circle it all back to trucking before we close out, it's kind of like being on the side of the road with your four ways on in any time pre 2000, let's say.
Mhm.
You hope enough people show up who've got a little bit of knowledge and a few tools and a couple spare parts, and you figure at some point we're going to reach critical mass. We're going to have enough people and somebody's going to show up who knows what to do, or we can scratch it out of each other and deduce it, and somebody's going to
Yep.
show up with enough tools and somebody's going to show up with the right spare part or something that will work, and we can get the rig rolling again. And that kind
Yep.
of feels like the community aspect that needs to go on and say, hey, I got my four ways on. Can we all pull up here and take a look at this problem
Mhm.
together and, and negotiate through it? Or are we just going to scream at each other and never accomplish anything?
Tony, I feel like your podcast and your efforts are a big part of that. I think a big part of what I see as a movement that maybe a groundswell that's maybe just getting started. I hope it continues and I hope it grows, but I see you putting in effort and the people, your guests putting in effort and just to try to come together long enough to have a good conversation and maybe get that guy's truck going or maybe figure out a better way than just some knee-jerk Molotov cocktail solution to everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be fair and transparent with the audience, there was a part of me, especially in the beginning, which was let's do a podcast and let's fill up some bottles and start chucking them, right? Like,
Well, that'll get some clicks.
right. But then, at the end of the day, you're like, but yeah, but what the hell good is that going to do? Maybe I get more followers faster,
Mhm.
but by God, I got to live with the legacy I'm going to leave behind.
Yeah.
And also, does that also jive with the bigger parts of things that I value in my life, which is
Mhm.
making a difference, being a good Christian, being somebody that other people could listen to and look up to and go, hey, that guy's a pretty good guy and he cares about some things that make sense more than just getting a few clicks. Maybe he's worth listening to a second time. You and I both know the wisdom and knowledge, practically and also theoretical and book learning, that's sitting behind the wheels of cabs out there driving down the highway is astronomical. Like the
Oh,
collective knowledge of truck drivers across all aspects, business, I don't care if it's woodworking, guitar playing. We got it all in the trucking industry.
mhm.
There's no shortage of ideas. Our challenge largely has been how do you assemble it towards good productive ends? It used to be technology was the barrier. Now it's obfuscation of our
Yeah,
opinions and other things manipulating
yeah.
it.
And time, because
And time.
those guys are out there, guys and gals, they have to make a living and they're isolated 90% of the time. And back in the day, there's CB radio was pretty prevalent. And I don't know, for me, music or silence took over the CB after a while because the guys that were actually thoughtful and cared and just were out there to get a job done, they weren't the ones yelling on the CB. And so I tended to revert into either music or silence for the last few years that I drove. But I think that population, like you said, is hugely competent in thinking through problem solving. Some are even extremely book learned, but even if they're not, I'll take problem solving skills over book learning 100% of the time. And I
Yeah.
think you have a ton of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got it in us. We just got to put forth the effort and the commitment to doing it.
Yeah.
Let's not
Mm.
fall for the sales pitch of the carnival barker of the moment
Yes.
and chase after objectives that don't really
Exactly.
align to a higher ideal.
Yep.
One of the areas that I find interesting, and I've got a lot of books on my shelf that I'm reading about it, which is the Teamsters era.
Mhm.
Because the trucking has broken a lot of ground in this country, especially around labor. The Teamsters actually won a bunch of stuff, and then all the non-Teamster truck drivers basically got excluded from it. And
Mhm.
then over the course of deregulation and other things, basically the Teamster truck driver, aside from a few big companies, has largely been destroyed. So it's like
Mhm.
all their hard work went for nothing in the end for truck drivers, which is
Mhm.
really unfortunate because, government workers and other people have received the benefits of stuff that truck drivers actually fought for. So we have the nobility within us
Mhm.
to fight for really worthwhile goals that dignify humanity and workers. We just got to organize it. To quote Jimmy, I mean, now I sound like Jimmy Hoffa or something, but
Yeah, that's all we have to do is just organize it. Okay, you let me know how that goes.
let me tell you about the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't, you know what? There's a part of that is the answer, though. There's flaws in it, of course, and human beings tend to be a big chunk of the flaws in most any idea.
Sure. Yeah.
But the idea of organizing and holding workers' dignity as a core principle,
Mm.
yeah, I'm on board with that all
Hmm.
the time. And especially when it comes to truck drivers' dignity and the amount that we do to enable the American dream being appropriately rewarded, that means something.
Yes, absolutely. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I like the pursuit of them, and I like it when other people are interested in the pursuit of them.
Yeah, and hopefully we run across somebody with a good idea, better than ours along the way.
Yeah, so yeah, and
Yeah, buddy.
if I can luckily come up with one little thing that maybe will trigger a good idea, that's probably the best I can hope for, but I'll keep slogging.
Well, brother, I'm so happy that we got you on
Yeah,
and I got to talk to you first of all, but that we get to
right.
talk and share the conversation with others. It's awesome to me.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, let's chat again one of these days. I got a few ideas to bounce off you, and you know how that goes. So anyway, yeah, appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed the heck out of it, and even got to tell and listen to a few trucker stories.
We're talking trucking life, uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories, and the miles in between. From first jobs to last hauls, the laughs that kept us going, and the lessons that left a mark.
Trans Carolina Permits is based out of North Carolina. They've been in business since 1977 and they've got a team with a ton of experience in all of our favorite part of trucking, which of course is the government. They provide a portfolio of services for the trucking industry, various applications and permits, FMCSA Authority 2290s, IRP tags, DMV tags, trailer plates, along with state filings for your business. Not to mention they have a compliance program. They'll help you with clearinghouse setup and queries, IFTA, and mileage reporting. So your state by state mileage, your fuel purchase tracking, and get that wrapped up into a nice little bundle for quarterly filings. They're a one stop shop for your trucking needs. You can find them on Facebook and LinkedIn, or check out their website, transcarolinapermits.com, or give them a call at 1 800 899 4870. Welcome back. I'll try to keep this short and sweet on the money line since we had a extended conversation there with Verlen. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. It was fun. A lot of Verlen and I's conversations tend to sound like a couple guys talking on a CB radio with about 500 miles to kill. Sometimes we wander, and that's part of the fun too. And sometimes reeling it back in is also part of the fun. It's a challenging topic to discuss and to think about because it does have so many aspects of it. And a lot of times, what we see is people simplifying the argument because people like simple arguments. And it's a disservice. First of all, it's really a disservice by the people we pay a lot of money to go to Washington to solve problems, to take the shortcuts and the easy way out. But for all of us to think through the things that we advocate for, I try to do it very carefully because I'm putting my opinion out there for others to listen to. And also just because I worry that sometimes we make overreactions to things, and at times the unintended consequences are significant. So, hope you enjoyed the conversation as we battered around the topic and tried to do our best at thinking through some of the perspectives that are impacted by this. We talk about in trucking culture things like code, things like standards, things like etiquette. They're squishy terms, and we define them. There's no Moses of trucking coming down from the mountain with the rules of trucking etiquette, what the rules of the FMCSA should be. We're people trying to figure it out and balance some really complicated questions and conflicting priorities as an industry, as individuals, as a country. And so we do our best, having a discussion and listening to one another and considering what other people have to say. And that's really important to me and hopefully to everybody, especially the people who have a say in what actually happens. I'm just a goofball with a microphone and the internet. Other people got way more important roles to play in this. I appreciate anybody's feedback, anybody's thoughts. Join in the discussion. I know Verlen does too. Share things that somebody else has learned that may influence our opinions on the matter. I think one of the most important things Verlen shared in all that discussion was that he's adapting as more information becomes available that tells a person maybe you should reconsider your opinion. Really, that's probably the best that we can do, knowing that we have finite time, finite resources, and a finite ability to comprehend all this stuff all at once and figure out what our opinion should be about what may be the best thing to do. That's it for the money line, maybe the shortest money line in history, who knows? Let's take a quick break and I'll drop it down to line 4 for the post trip and we'll get out of here for this week. Quick reminder to pay a visit to our friends of the show on social media. I-95 Truckers, Big Cal's Trucking Kitchen, Mara Elliott, Truckers Wealth, Superior Trucking Payroll Service. Hey, I nailed it. And I did it smoothly that time. Wow. The Feathersons, of course, and everybody who's been on the show. Next week, I'm going to be in Oklahoma City. I'm going to get a chance while I'm over there to hopefully meet up with a longtime friend of mine as well, Eric, and talk about his trucking story and what he's up to now. Hopefully, the Oklahoma weather is kind to me. It looks like the weather should be pretty good. I'm kind of soft now. I've been in Arizona for 15 years. I'm used to the variations of the day-to-day forecast being about 1 degree different from the day before. But Oklahoma can get a little wilder than that. So hopefully I have a good weather week while I'm over there. The summer truck show season is still in full swing. The ATHS, American Truck Historical Society, had their big show last week. Tons of amazing photos, videos, the old trucks. That's their premier event that rotates around every year between, I think it's 4 locations, but up in Madison, Wisconsin last weekend. More great trucking shows coming up. Now that we're in the summer swing of things, the Walcott Truckers Jamboree, Southern Idaho Truck Show, Coonley Brothers, their Semi Stampede. They got 2 of them, one in June, one in September. Louisiana Truck Show coming up later on this fall. Quick reminder to check out the website, thetruckshowlist.com. They've got a ton of great information on more trucking shows going on across the country this summer and fall. Be sure to reach out if you'd like to be on the program. Like, follow, comment, subscribe, leave us a review. Email us at inbox@channel19experience.com. There's also a contact form on the website. Keep sharing the show with your friends. Thanks for listening and see y'all next week. We've got work to do.
This has been the Channel 19 Experience. If it's about trucking, we're talking about it. All uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories. But we talk about the world of trucking today, too. Everything from legislation to lane changes in the industry. We got it covered. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back at the ranch soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on social media at Channel 19 Experience and the website at www.channel19experience.com. That's channel and the numbers 19. See you down the road.